2024 Robert S. McNamara Lecture on War and Peace, featuring Pramila Patten, United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. My name is Mira Sholivar, and I'm a freshman at the college planning to study applied math and government, as well as a member of the Forum Committee. Our moderator for tonight's discussion will be Dara K. Cohen, who is a political scientist and professor of public policy at the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Her research and teaching interests include the causes and consequences of civil war and other forms of political violence, gender and conflict, and qualitative and mixed research methods. She is currently serving as the area chair for the International and Global Affairs area. Please join me in giving our moderator a warm welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the very kind introduction. As was just shared, my name is Dara K. Cohen, and I am a professor of public policy here at the Harvard Kennedy School. And tonight it is my honor to be moderating our event, the annual Robert S. McNamara Lecture on War and Peace. This annual lecture brings distinguished guests to our school, selected by a committee of faculty experts. And these experts, or the guests, I should say, offer insights into ongoing policy problems related to issues of national and international security, conflict, and human rights in the global arena. Unfortunately, the McNamara family is not able to be with us here in person tonight, but we welcome those members of the family who are able to join us virtually online. Our distinguished guest this evening is Pramila Patten, who is, as was just shared, the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. I'm going to be introducing Special Representative Patten in just a moment, but first I wanted to just review a couple of housekeeping items. The first is just our plan for the evening. Our plan tonight will be first to hear some opening remarks from the special representative, and then the two of us will have the pleasure of a conversation here up at the front of the room, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for some Q&A to close out the evening. Second, I just also wanted to caution our audience that some of the content of tonight's discussion is graphic and may be difficult for some of us to hear. So please feel free to take a break and rejoin us when you're ready if you do need to do so. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest for the evening. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Pramila Patten, who is the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict. She served in this role since she was appointed by the UN Secretary General in April of 2017. She's the third person to hold this role, which was established by Security Council Resolution 1888 in the year 2009. Which is only 15 years ago, so it's a relatively recent position. Special Representative Patten is a practicing barrister at law and has served since 2003 as a member of the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. She has a wealth of judicial expertise in sexual and gender-based violence, as well as in issues of women, peace, and security. Since 2014, she has been a member of the High-Level Advisory Group on the Global Study on implementation of Security Council Resolution 1325, the landmark Security Council Resolution on Women, Peace, and Security. And since 2010, she has served as a member of the advisory panel for the African Women's Rights Observatory within the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. She has also served in a wide variety of other roles, including as an advisor in her country of Mauritius's Ministry of Women's Rights, Child Development, and Family Welfare. She also held an appointment as a lecturer in the Faculty of Law at the University of Mauritius, and served as a district court magistrate as well. With that, please join me in welcoming Special Representative Pramila Patten to the Harvard Kennedy School.
Thank you so much, Dara, for these words of introduction. I would like to express my sincere gratitude and thanks to the McNamara family Professor Dara K. Cohen and the Harvard Kennedy School for the invitation and for shining the spotlight on what Dara said, a very difficult and painful subject. In fact, we meet at a time when conflict-related sexual violence is again in our daily headlines, and its unabated brutality on 21st century battlefields and its recurrence with each new wave of warfare continues to shock the collective conscience of humanity. It is, sadly, a cheap and effective weapon that is often cost-free. Sexual violence dehumanizes and destabilizes the enemy by shattering lives and livelihoods with consequences that echo across generations, including in the plight of children born of wartime rape. Perpetrators know that victims do not report owing to stigma, shame, fear of reprisals, and rejection. It is a fact that we are living through uniquely dangerous times marked by cascading crises, including an epidemic of coup that have turned the clock further and further back on women's rights, leaving survivors further and further behind. And amid the highest number of violent conflicts since the Second World War, displacement levels having surpassed 110 million, and more than 600 million women and girls now live in conflict-affected countries. At the same time, we see that global military spending is at a record-breaking 2.2 trillion USD, when the world's resources are being used to feed the flames of conflict, while women and children starve and humanitarian aid budgets are slashed. Militarization is on the march while civic space is shrinking alongside a virulent backlash on gender equality and rising reprisals against human rights defenders and journalists who bring atrocity crimes to the attention of the world. It is against this grim backdrop that last week I commemorated the 15th anniversary of my mandate. And that was an opportunity to take stock of challenges and progress in combating sexual violence, which I will delve into today. And at the heart of that event last week was a survivors' hearing to amplify the voices of survivors, not as passive beneficiaries, but as co-creators of solutions. And since taking up this mandate in June 2017, I have met with countless survivors and carried their ground truths to the corridors of power. A single mother of 8 children, 2 of whom were born of wartime rape in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, spoke about an association she has founded to support children born of rape, who are often barred from essential cultural and familial networks. Service providers in both Haiti and the Sudan described an ever-increasing danger in delivering services and support to survivors of sexual violence who suffered gang rape and are often left with severe physical injuries and sexually transmitted diseases. Jeanette Bedoya, a Colombian journalist whom I named a United Nations global champion for the fight against sexual violence in conflict, and who was kidnapped, tortured, and raped, she has since been campaigning for the rights of victims of sexual violence and underscored the importance of transforming her pain into a driving force for action. In her own words, "It is no time to be silent." In terms of the establishment and the evolution of my mandate, although sexual violence has been part of every war, from antiquity to the nuclear age, my mandate as special representative was only established in 2009 through the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1888. And the robust prevention and response infrastructure which the Security Council established in 2009 includes my mandate to provide coherent and strategic leadership to global efforts, working primarily through the interagency initiative UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict. And the UN Action Coordination Network, which I chair, has grown from 12 members in 2017 to 26 members from across the spectrum of public health, human rights, gender equality, peacekeeping, political affairs, and development. And the network serves as an incubator and delivery system for knowledge products, guidance, and tools, including our prevention framework to improve practice in the field. The resolution 1888 also established a team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict to strengthen institutional safeguards against impunity. Justice can have, as we know, a cascade effect, whereby each verdict inspires another survivor to come forward, and each sentence can deter another would-be perpetrator and put commanders on notice. And over time, this can convert cultures of impunity into cultures of deterrence. And in this vein, my team of experts currently support national authorities and justice sector actors in over 12 countries. The Security Council Resolution 1888 further called for the deployment of women protection advisors to the field to enhance monitoring, reporting, and response efforts, including engagement with parties to the conflict to obtain concrete, time-bound protection commitments. And these women protection advisors are really my eyes and ears on the ground, and they have a key role to play. Since then, the Security Council has built up a robust normative framework consisting of 10 resolutions on women, peace, and security, including no less than 5 specifically dealing with sexual violence. For example, Security Council Resolution 2331, adopted in 2016, condemns sexual violence as a tactic of terrorism. And that was a response to transnational terrorist groups such as Daesh, which had reduced women and girls to an expendable currency in the political economy of war. The last resolution, 2467, adopted in 2019, marked a turning point in calling for a holistic approach centered on survivors' rights, needs, and wishes that ensure their full and meaningful participation in the decisions that affect their lives. It also recognized for the first time the plight of children born of rape in conflict as right holders. Today, peacekeepers are being trained to prevent, detect, and deter sexual violence as part of their operational readiness standards. These offenses have become an integral part of international criminal investigations, and 9 of the 15 UN sanctions regime include sexual violence as part of their designation criteria. So we have come a long way in terms of evolution. But when we look at the situation on the ground, we see that a major gap persists between commitments and compliance, between resolutions and reality on the ground. And the annual report of the Secretary General on conflict-related sexual violence, compiled by my office, paint a disturbing picture each year. The last report, covering the year 2023, which was debated in April before the Security Council, recorded 3,688 UN-verified cases of sexual violence, reflecting a dramatic increase of 50% as compared with 2022. But as we know, sexual violence remains chronically underreported, and we know that many cases never reach a clinic, let alone a courtroom. And sexual violence, as we speak, continue to be used as a tactic of war, torture, terrorism, and political repression. The annual reports of the Secretary General surface very painful human stories, from mass abduction and rapes in the DRC, including the rape of 16 women during an attack on a mining site, to brutal gang rapes of women in Tigray, Ethiopia, with one woman being raped by 27 Eritrean and Ethiopian soldiers. That conflict alone has left more than 10,000 survivors of sexual violence in desperate need of assistance and redress. Sexual violence has profound and adverse effects on women's physical, sexual, reproductive, and mental health. War means that services are least available just when survivors of sexual and other violence need them most. We are today witnessing so-called surgical strikes on surgical wards, the bombing of maternity clinics and hospitals, essential medical supplies being looted, and healthcare facilities being forced to close their doors and relocate to areas remote from the populations in desperate need. And we see this in Ethiopia, Haiti, Mali, Sudan, Ukraine, Gaza, where access to life-saving services, including sexual and reproductive care, is severely curtailed by insecurity. We are also noting a trend where healthcare providers are targeted to silence and intimidate them, to destroy their information before it can become evidence, and to create a hostile environment that deters future reporting and response. In 2023, I conducted 5 field missions in Ukraine, Colombia, DRC, Central African Republic, South Sudan, including Awel at the border with Sudan. And this year, I went to Israel and occupied West Bank, Ukraine, and Chad, including Adre at the border with Sudan. Next week, I'm going back to Colombia, and next month, I'm deploying a team to Haiti. And as we speak, there are out-of-control geopolitical division and ferocious conflict, which are inflicting terrible suffering on civilians. And unfortunately, the world is too small for so many hotspots, but I'll just identify a few country situations. In the Sudan, for example, since the conflict erupted on 15th of April of last year, between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support services, sexual violence against displaced and refugee women and girls has spiked, with women's bodies being literally on the front lines of the conflict. Young women are being abducted from dormitories and hospitals, shackled and transported in the back of pickup trucks by fighters to be sold in slave markets in northern Darfur. Last year in September, I went to a refugee settlement in Awel, South Sudan, at the border with Sudan. And last July, I went to camps in Adre and Farshana in eastern Chad to meet with Sudanese refugees. The women shared harrowing accounts of brutal rape and gang rape, often in front of family members, abduction to extort ransom payments, and trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. They all shared their feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, their dire situation in the camps due to food insecurity, limited access to services, and safety concerns in the camp. A devastated grandmother told me how, after convincing her daughter to let her take her 6-year-old granddaughter, she could not protect the girl who was raped in the camp. In Ukraine, I heard first-hand accounts of sexual violence perpetrated by Russian soldiers. The ages of the victims varied from 4 to 84 years old. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry provided chilling details of sexual violence affecting victims of all ages. Russian armed forces raping girls when entering or occupying civilian homes, children raped, tortured, unlawfully confined, killed and injured, an 83-year-old woman raped by a Russian armed force serviceman in her house in the presence of her physically disabled husband. As we speak, DRC is facing a severe, complex, and neglected humanitarian crisis characterized by massive displacement. Approximately 7.3 million people are displaced, with 6.9 million in the eastern provinces alone. Last year, I visited eastern DRC following alarming reports of a spike in sexual violence due to the resumption of hostilities with M23. Many of the women and girls I met had been recently raped, including while undertaking essential livelihood activities such as searching for food or collecting wood and water. They face an impossible choice between economic subsistence and sexual violence, between their livelihoods and their lives. According to ICRC, women and girls have now resorted to carrying condoms when they go outside of the camps to carry out livelihood activities. In this climate of interlinked physical and food insecurity, brothels called Maisons de Tolérance have proliferated in and around displacement camps, with women and girls driven into prostitution by sheer economic desperation. And I'm receiving alarming reports of widespread trafficking in persons, particularly for sexual slavery and exploitation, as well as an increase in child and forced marriages. And I have just received a shocking report of acts of sexual violence perpetrated against children as young as 9, with genital mutilation being committed by armed men using tree branches, guns, and knives. And I had an opportunity during UNGA to raise this with the president himself. In Haiti, armed gangs are using rape, including collective rapes and other forms of sexual violence, to instill fear, punish, subjugate, and inflict pain on local populations with the ultimate goal of expanding their areas of influence. And we know they are able to commit such acts of sexual violence mainly because of widespread impunity and ease of access to high-caliber weapons and ammunition trafficked from abroad. In Israel, I found clear and convincing information that sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, had been committed against some women and children captives, with reasonable ground to believe that such violence may still be ongoing against those still held in captivity. I also have reasonable ground to believe that sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred during the 7th of October attacks in at least 3 locations, namely the Nova Music Festival site, Road 232, and Kibbutz Reim. And in most of these incidents, victims were first subjected to rape and then killed. And in at least 2 incidents, there was rape of women's corpses. Across multiple locations, we found a recurring pattern of victims found fully or partially undressed, bound, and shot. We also found circumstantial evidence across multiple locations inferred from a recurring pattern of victims being undressed. In Ramallah, I received information from several interlocutors about a dramatic deterioration of the human rights situation following the 7th of October attacks, with the launch of law enforcement operations by the Israeli government, accompanied by mass arrest. And in the context of detention, I received reports of alleged instances of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, including various forms of sexual violence in the form of invasive body searches, unwanted touching of intimate areas, beatings, including in the genital areas, threats of rape against women, and threats of rape against female family members in the case of men, and inappropriate strip search and prolonged forced nudity of detainees, including during interrogation and during transfer to other detention facilities. Sexual harassment and threats of rape during house raid and at checkpoints were also reported, as well as threats of rape if conditions of detention were reported or publicly disclosed after liberation. Since my visit to the occupied West Bank, a number of recent reports from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as the Commission of Inquiry, have surfaced with many similar reports. In terms of inroads, although the challenges remain daunting as new protection crises emerge, we also see some signs of hope amidst this global turmoil. It's not all doom and gloom. My office continues to engage with government authorities at the highest level to offer technical assistance. And in this regard, I have signed a dozen agreements, the most recent one being with the government of Ukraine in May 2022. At the same time, we have engaged with non-state armed groups implicated in patterns of sexual violence to foster compliance and behavioral change, and we do closely monitor all situations of concern, calling for restraint, unimpeded humanitarian access, comprehensive service provision, and effective investigation. Despite significant funding shortfalls, the 2 operational arms of my office, the team of experts on the rule of law and the UN Action Network, they are supporting governments to implement these formal agreements, and they are reaching countless previously unreachable or invisible victims. The team of experts works closely with affected government to support the investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of crimes under both civilian and military justice systems. They support legislative reform, protection of victims and witnesses, and they are currently working in 12 countries. Over the past years, we have noted a number of very encouraging development in the area of justice and accountability, as well as legislative reform in DRC, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Guinea, Iraq, Colombia, and a few examples include Guinea, where after 13 years of support from the team of experts through every phase of the criminal process, that was instrumental to the indictment, trial, and conviction by a domestic court for rape as crime against humanity of the former head of state and President Dadis Camara and 10 co-defendants who were ministers at the time, and that conviction fell last July. In DRC, the TOE was instrumental in the progress made in terms of the number of emblematic cases prosecuted as international crimes, including as crime against humanity. And the latest landmark progress is the first conviction for forced pregnancy in a domestic court, and that happened just in May. In Central African Republic, again, with the support of my office, we have been able to advance the number of investigation and prosecution of sexual violence cases in both domestic courts, and as well as the special criminal court as a result of support, including to a specialized police unit, which has conducted over 3,000 investigations since 2017. And the High Court of Bangui has delivered several convictions in the past 2 years, while the Special Criminal Court has delivered a landmark judgment for rape as war crime and crime against humanity. In Nigeria, after the support provided to the Nigerian prosecutors' complex case group, this has resulted in the first prosecution and conviction of Boko Haram for sexual violence as a tactic of terrorism. In Iraq, the Council of Representatives adopted the Yazidi Survivors Law, which provides reparations and other forms of support to victims of Daesh activities. Colombia is another one of the few bright spots where peace negotiations have almost attained gender parity and historic progress is being made in terms of transitional justice. The Special Jurisdiction for Peace, which my office is supporting, has opened a dedicated case on sexual and gender-based violence known as Macro Case 11. And in May 2023, the last time I was there, I heard from survivors about the transformative power of recognition and reparation, and that was very encouraging. In Ukraine, the Office of the Prosecutor General, upon our advice, has established a specialized unit on CRSV, and my team is providing training and operational support to that specialized unit. The UN Action Network has implemented joint catalytic projects in a range of settings from DRC to Ukraine to Mali, Sudan, Somalia, and they have supported like over 50 projects across 18 conflict-affected settings. In terms of initiatives from my office, when history looks back on this painful episode as part of the long litany of battles fought on the bodies of women and girls, we will, of course, rightly be asked what we did to honor our commitment. And in this regard, I just wish to briefly highlight some key initiatives and tools developed by my office to combat this heinous crime, and this include a prevention framework. Survivors are my moral compass in the execution of my mandate, and each and every time I meet survivors, I hear them repeating the same message to me, that what happened to them could have been prevented. And this is what led me in the discharge of my mandate to get the 26 UN entities of which the network is comprised to converge and think prevention, and that prevention framework was launched in September 2022 and is now being rolled out in a number of countries. Many countries lack comprehensive legal framework and that recognizes all forms of sexual violence as crime. And you understand, you can imagine what weaknesses in law, how it can allow perpetrators to escape punishment and deny victims the right to a remedy. In 2021, my office launched model legislative provision and guidance on investigation and prosecution of sexual violence cases, which contains state-of-the-art legal provision required to prosecute any form of sexual violence. Impunity for wartime rape, we know, remains the rule, and accountability the rare exception. And to break the vicious cycle of violence and impunity, we must use all the diplomatic and enforcement tools at our disposal. And that is why in recent years I have been advocating for sanctions and judicial accountability measures to work in tandem. And I regularly brief sanctions committees and make recommendations for targeted sanctions in the form of travel ban, embargoes, and asset freeze. And my office has just recruited 2 specialists on sanctions. Another area where I have put a lot of emphasis has been reparation, because this is what survivors ask the most and receive the least. And I'm very pleased that just over the past 2 years, we have been able to get countries like the DRC, Iraq, Ukraine, and Guinea to adopt legislation on reparations. In conclusion, I would just like to say that, and that was the message that I conveyed last Wednesday during the commemoration event, that survivors need more than our solidarity, that they need tangible support in the form of accountability, reparations, and economic reintegration, as well as significant investment in structural prevention. And 15 years after the creation of my mandate, we owe survivors no less. And I said it on Wednesday to members of the Council and all the member states that we have reached an inflection point in this agenda. We must choose between defending the gains we have made over the past decade to turn commitments into compliance and resolutions into solutions, or retreating in the face of the new conflict that have erupted on almost every continent. And this is nothing short of a credibility test for the multilateral system. Today, we know more than ever before about the drivers and consequences of wartime sexual violence, and critically, we know what works. It is possible to deliver justice. It is possible to deliver protection and assistance to survivors, to help them rebuild their lives and livelihoods. We must build and expand our partnership with national authorities, civil society organizations, grassroots practitioners, service providers, and survivors themselves. But these must be backed by requisite political resolve and financial resources. And I pledge for my part that I will continue to advocate and urge the international community to give this agenda the attention and the investment that it deserves to replace horror with healing and hope. Thank you.
So much. Thank you for those important and impactful comments and your reflections, and also, of course, for all of the critical work that you and your office do on this topic. I wanted to start by asking you about conflict-related sexual violence in some of the ongoing and also underreported places around the world. I think you spoke so eloquently about meeting with survivors in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Colombia, in Sudan, Haiti, Ethiopia. You also travel quite a bit, 5 missions last year. By the end of the calendar year this year, you'll do an additional 5 field missions. But some of the countries you visit are heavily covered by the global news media, and others are virtually ignored, and that's true even despite a massive scale in some of those cases. I was struck when you spoke about what we know to have happened in Ethiopia, where we know that there are 10,000 survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in that conflict alone. So I was hoping you could say a little bit about how you see your role in creating a broader awareness of the global scale of conflict-related sexual violence, and also to offer some reflections on the consequences of this kind of inconsistent attention to some conflicts relative to other conflicts, combined with, you mentioned in your remarks, a lack of funding. So there's a lot of political will for resolutions, but where is the political will for funding to this issue? So what are some of the consequences for this inconsistent attention for those who are most affected by conflict-related sexual violence?
Thank you so much for this question. I must say that there are many more conflicts that I actually cover. So I only cover those conflicts that are on the agenda of the Security Council. So maybe that's the first point that I have to make. So I do not get to cover a significant number of conflicts. So currently, for example, I'm in the last report of the Secretary General for 2023, I covered 21 conflicts. And I believe for 2024, it will be the same number of conflict. So that is the constraint that I have. Maybe the first constraint that I have, because often member states come to me and ask me, why aren't you saying anything about what's happening in my country? And so that is my response. I have a Security Council mandate, and I'm pretty limited. I'm very much constrained by the parameters of these Security Council and what is or what is not on the agenda of the Council. For example, Ukraine got on the agenda of the Security Council in 2022, but not back in 2014. So the office has been covering Ukraine in 2022, and I was in Ukraine like 2 months after the Russian aggression. Ethiopia, it has been very difficult for me to address Ethiopia up front, although I have managed to a certain extent to circumvent it, because it was labeled on the agenda of the Council as some conflict in Africa. It was mainly Africa. And because of the atrocities that was happening in Tigray, I was never able, for example, to get traction with the government, because it was not, they knew that it was not upfront as Ethiopia on the agenda of the Security Council. So the government of Ethiopia played on this, and I could not secure an agreement, although now they want an agreement with the office and they want support. It is true that not even amongst those 21 conflicts that I currently cover, and I've seen this especially after the war in Ukraine, that everything fell apart, and I had to go to donors. And after COVID, the mandate was hit badly in terms of funding. I mean, COVID impacted on the funding. And I recall I was like on the road fundraising for the mandate, talking about COVID, and then came the war in Ukraine, when, you know, my traditional donors turned around and said, we are supporting Ukraine. I sit in my office, and the money comes for Ukraine, and literally I have to go with a begging bowl, and I had, at times, I've been very undiplomatic to say, listen, you know, I cannot look at myself in a mirror, because I go in all these conflict countries, and when I go, I create expectations. I meet with survivors. I see food insecurity like I've never seen before. I've been in this mandate for 7.5 years. I see the need for the provision of mental health services, for example, or economic empowerment, because these women are struck by the double tragedy of rape and rejection, and they give me a strong lesson on the link between their physical security and their economic security. There are so many things that I want to do, but I cannot. And So this is the kind of language that I have to use to donors to say, listen, I mean, like, you cannot ignore these conflicts. You have to put your money where your mouth is. You pay lip service to all these conflicts. But I must say that the situation has not improved dramatically, and that's why my message last Wednesday, I was quite blunt in my message. But what I do to raise the profile is I continue to visit. I continue to go to these conflict countries, especially where there is a lack of spotlight, where I see they're falling below the radar. I invite survivors. I do this on a regular basis to bring the survivors to speak to members of the council. I use every opportunity to do that. For example, survivors from Myanmar, survivors from Sudan, survivors from DRC, from Libya. I have privileged these countries where I see there is a complete lack of attention and almost a complete lack, there's total indifference to what's going. Nothing shocks anyone. You walk into the council and you talk to them about a woman being raped by 27 soldiers, and you do not see a single reaction. I went to the DRC last year because I got figures like from UNFPA talking about 38,000 people seeking that required clinical management of rape. UNICEF talked about 32,000 cases. MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, that usually they don't share their data. They called me and they said, we are dealing with like 675 cases per week in one camp. And you walk in the council with this data, and you get a blank look. And yes, selectivity has always been part of the game. That I don't think is new. They each come with their own agenda, but I stick to my mandate. I have an advocacy mandate. I shine the spotlight on every conflict, and I use the tools that I have. I brief sanctions committee. I have to pick and choose member states that are willing to shine the spotlight on a particular country through an ARIA formula meeting. I invite survivors. I speak to the media. But more importantly, I go because for me, the mandate was created for survivors and has the face of a survivor, and my moral compass remain the survivors. Women and girls significantly impacted by this scourge, but also men and boys. And it is through the advocacy that I have been able to raise the profile. For example, I was shocked in one of my very first mission in Maiduguri, Nigeria, where I saw these girls that had been abducted by Boko Haram and released from captivity, but were rejected by their family, and they were in the camp in Maiduguri. And I was in a room, and I saw little girls, like 12 to 14, and small babies. And I asked my staff, I said, can you count how many girls and how many babies? And there were like 166 babies to 200 girls. And then I spoke to the girls in a smaller group, and they told me that they were being called Boko Haram wives, and the babies were being called Boko Haram snakes. And they told me about what they were going through inside the camp, the abuse that they had to go through. And that resonated a lot with me when I came back. And then I went to Bosnia shortly after, and there I met with adult children born from rape who were able to express themselves and to talk to me about the intergenerational stigma. And I started by inviting one of them to speak to members of the council and shine the spotlight on the plight of these children, and to show that in Africa they are mainly stateless, fit to be recruited by armed groups, no name, in Iraq, no religion, and they are rejected. And it took me only 2 years to get a Security Council resolution that recognized that these children have rights connected to their mothers under CEDAW conventions. So there should be no issue around nationality, but also right distinct from their mothers under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And now I was tasked to prepare a special report for the Secretary General, which is before the Council. So we have made a comparison in 23 countries, 23 conflicts, and now we are rolling out the recommendation in that special report in a number of countries. So I continue to shine the spotlight, and I will never give up.
I think in the interest of time, I want to leave plenty of time for our audience to ask questions. So I think we can open up for Q&A for this portion of our event. We have 2 microphones in the back of the room, so if you would like to ask a question, please line up at one of the 2 microphones. I will ask that if you have a question, you to please identify yourself and provide your university affiliation, and then as a courtesy to others lined up, ask please one brief question in the interest of time. And as we like to remind each other at events like this, a question ends with a question mark. So no speech making, please, but actually ask a question of our guests. So if you have a question, feel free to get up at the microphones. Maybe as folks are lining up, maybe I can ask you, maybe we have someone coming? Great. I'll ask you later my question because we have someone coming here now. Yes, please go ahead and remember to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, so I'm Ada. I'm at the Weatherhead Center. Yeah, thank you so much for coming here and talking about this really difficult and important topic. I was hesitating whether I should ask this or not, but since it came up a few times, in what I've been reading, so I just want to ask, and maybe I misinterpreted something, but you started talking about sexual violence and multiple conflicts, and talking about survivors and this horrifying sexual violence that they go through in multiple conflicts. And then when I heard you talk about also the sexual violence that Israeli hostages have experienced, and not only hostages, but also people that were assassinated on October 7th, you start by saying, I have reasonable grounds to believe that. And so I wondered why when we're talking about Israeli women that are raped, and bodies also, we've all seen this, they've recorded it for us, Hamas, right? So I was wondering why, in that case, we need those kind of, careful language, and why that's not the case with other survivors that obviously it's very difficult to observe them in the act. Thank you.
Answer briefly, or we can collect questions?
We can collect a few questions.
Okay, we'll collect a few questions.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for being here. My name is Margaret Daramola. I am a Master's of Theological student at Harvard Divinity School. I look at the role of religion in conflict resolution and peace building. So I actually wrote my question down, so I'm just going to read it. In contexts where traditional and religious beliefs contribute to sexual violence, how can we effectively engage with community leaders who often have been desensitized to the harm? And what strategies can we employ to foster dialogue and address structural violence? Thank you.
We'll do all 4, and then
Yes,
I'll turn the floor over to you to close us out.
Thank you very much for the talk tonight. So my name is Patrick Vink. I'm on faculty at the medical school in School of Public Health. I guess my question was really around your thinking about the future of your work in a context where support for peacekeeping operations is largely decreasing. We've talked about DRC. And at the same time, there's the review of the peace-building architecture next year. So what do you envision that future to look like in a context?
This last one, thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for this important and horrible lecture. My name is Hildur Hjörvar. I'm a graduate student at Harvard Law School. I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit more to the development of sexual violence as a crime against humanity and a war crime, the development of that concept in the International Criminal Court and criminal tribunals, and how that feeds into domestic criminal prosecution. Thank you.
Great questions. Right, the first question about Israel and the language that I use about reasonable ground. What I did in Israel, the mission in Israel was quite unique because I compiled the annual report of the Secretary General, and the information comes from the field. It comes from typically the Human Rights Office in peacekeeping mission or the Office of the High Commissioner in non-peacekeeping settings. So the UN agencies on the ground will send me the information which I use for the report. And that is, it has to be UN verified information, and that is spelled out in the Security Council resolution. I cannot include anything else in the report of the Secretary General. In the context of Israel, there are no UN agencies in Israel, and immediately after the 7th of October, the Office of the High Commissioner and the High Commissioner himself offered to come with a team to Israel to inquire into the 7th of October attacks. The commission, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry, which is a standing commission of inquiry, also offered to come in and to investigate. They were both turned down. So I was confronted at the time around November because we all saw what we saw on TV in broad. We all woke up on the 7th of October watching the news and seeing how women were abducted and were taken to Gaza so I went to see the Secretary General and I told him, Secretary General, what do we do about your 2023 report? And I cannot include anything that. There was a lot of information in the media about sexual violence. I received a letter from the government of Israel about the first line. It was about hundreds, if not thousands, of cases of sexual violence. And I showed him the letter and I said, "What do we do for your report? Do you see a report for 2023 without the 7th of October attacks and what happened in Israel?" And he said no. So at the same time, I got an invitation from the government of Israel to come and so that's the context where I went. I had to put up a team together because even my team of experts, I do not have forensic experts, I do not have specialists in interviewing survivors of sexual violence. So I had to put up a team. I do not have a digital analyst. I had to put up a team together and I went. So I made it very clear, so I had to put in writing the parameters of the exercise that I was doing. It was only for the purpose of collecting and gathering information about the 7th of October, but really stressing that it's not an investigation like the COI, the Commission of Inquiry, is mandated to do, or the Office of the High Commissioner is mandated to do. So that's why, even if you read the report, which was issued on the 4th of March, I do not talk about evidence, I talk about information. I did not meet with any survivor of sexual violence. I was told that there was a handful of survivors who were too traumatized to talk to me, and since my work is premised on the basis of protecting survivors, having a trauma-informed, survivor-centered approach. Of course, I did not press, but I met with hostages that had been released and got first-hand information from released hostages. That's why I said I have clear and convincing information, because I have no means of verifying. And I said I visited 4 locations, and I said I have reasonable ground to believe, because that's the threshold, reasonable ground to believe that sexual violence occurred in 3 of these 4 locations. And then I drew inference from the circumstantial information. When you see women tied to trees or on the ground, hands tied behind their back, naked or partially naked, and shot in the face or in the genitals, you infer that's some form of sexual violence. So so it is a unique situation, and I have informed the Israeli government. I just had a meeting last week with a team that came from Israel to tell them, you will, if you do not allow OHCHR to come or the Commission of Inquiry, I know there's a lack of trust, there's a trust deficit with the COI, but please consider the Office of the High Commissioner, because you will have a report for 2024 where there will be nothing new to report on Israel, but there will be a lot of information on the sexualized torture in West Bank and Gaza. Already I have seen 3 reports for this year. By the end of the year, I'll get more information, so I've told them, and then you will say that the report is uneven, but so they know, and they have raised question, what about you coming back? And I said, I do not have this mandate. It was pretty exceptional what I was allowed to do by the Secretary General, but I cannot keep working on an exceptional basis and stepping on the mandate of my colleagues. Question about religious...
Very nearly out of time, so I just wanted to flag that for you so we can...
So religious leaders and traditional leaders, they are key partners, and in fact, 2018, I signed a framework of cooperation with Religion for Peace, and I do work a lot with religious leaders. Sometimes I see the backlash. Sometimes I see laws being blocked by religious groups. For example, in Mali, I've seen that. In Somalia, I have seen that. So I do use Religion for Peace to get more avant-garde religious leaders to talk peer-to-peer. And right now I'm working with Religion for Peace to get them to work with perpetrators, because that's a gap that I have noted in my work in terms of not doing enough work with perpetrators. I have a simple reason for that. The funds are limited, and I have to invest the fund in terms of the work with survivors as opposed to perpetrators. I do work with armed groups and state actors, state and non-state actors, but really working with perpetrators is something that I have assigned to religious leaders. The other question about, I can't read my handwriting, mission drawdown. Very good question. I'm extremely concerned, and so are my colleagues with protection mandate, like children in armed conflict. The impact of mission drawdown and special political mission is going to impact heavily on our mandate. Already we are feeling it. We are seeing this in DRC, in Sudan, in Mali, and there are others coming up. And what I have done, it's a stopgap measure. We've done that in Ukraine, and it's working, is embedding a senior women protection advisor, the women protection advisor infrastructure of Resolution 1960, into the RC's office. And that is something that's actually working. I've done it for Myanmar, but not inside Myanmar, outside in Bangkok. But Ukraine is the best example, where we have a senior women protection advisor in the RC office. And this is what I'm advocating for as a stopgap measure. I've already spoken to the government of Sudan, and they've agreed, so we will have someone deployed in Port Sudan. But that, again, that's a stopgap measure as from the perspective of my mandate. The question on the sexual violence as war crime against humanity. I mean, like that's a very technical question that requires time. But what we do is, maybe I'll just give you the example of Ukraine, where we saw gaps in their national legislation, and since we are also working on legislative reform, we have really worked on ensuring that they have a crime against humanity provision. And in fact, it's the work over the past 2 years that have pushed Ukraine to ratify the Rome Statute. And in fact, as from the 1st of January 2025, Ukraine will be a party to the Rome Statute, but we are already working on the domestication of the Rome Statute. And in all our African countries, that's what we've been doing. Wherever there are gaps, where there's a lack of domestication of the Rome Statute, we've done that in DRC, in Central African Republic, and we see prosecution for sexual violence as an international crime. And that's also a piece of advice that I've given to Israel also, because currently they're looking into prosecuting sexual violence as domestic crime, but not as crime against humanity, and they're not going for command responsibility. So I have recommended a framework of cooperation with my office, whereby my team of experts could provide similar support like we are providing in the other countries.
Wonderful. I'm afraid we are officially out of time, so I will just say thank you once again to Special Representative Pramila Patten, both for the incredibly important work that you do on this often quite horrifying topic, and also for coming here tonight to the Kennedy School to deliver the annual Robert S. McNamara Lecture. I also wanted to say thank you to our wonderful audience, to each and every one of you for coming out to join us here tonight in the room, and thanks to those who joined us virtually on the live stream as well. Please, everyone, join me once again in thanking our distinguished speaker for coming to the